Hey, welcome friends. Here we are. It is Chat with Matt. Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. here in New Zealand, the 19th of January 2022. Here we go. We're getting into it now, week 3. Full moon was yesterday, less than 24 hours ago. It was about lunchtime my time, so it's about 21 hours ago. If I do the math, a bit more, a bit less, whatever, something like that. So we're still very much within the sort of the window of time that the full moon has a relatively intense influence on our state of being, on our, specifically our emotional state of being, the moon being very good at pulling water around. So be compassionate with yourself, first and foremost, and you don't need to buy into how it should be, could be, might be, but many of us are feeling, you know, rather intensely influenced in an emotional way, state of being, mood, energy fluctuations, etc., etc. So it's always good to have something to, I don't like the word blame, but something to ascribe a reason to, so that we don't just keep labeling ourselves as going mad or, you know, losing our mind or, oh, here's one, emotionally immature, because that's what I was just reading Jen's question that I'm going to answer in a minute. You know, we can feel all emotionally unstable at the moment and then label ourselves as emotionally immature. Hey, brother Glenn, how are you? And it's, you know, it's just the moon. It's just a natural phase. And what is this? You know, who said we're supposed to be so quote unquote emotionally mature or emotionally stable, which is kind of what emotional maturity gets ascribed to. Whether is that really maturity, or is maturity more an acceptance? That, you know, as we mature, we accept that we are emotionally unstable sometimes, and we don't need to overly control our emotions. Yeah, it's beneficial not to be, you know, pushed around too much by our emotions and allow our emotions to overly influence what we are doing and how we are presenting ourselves to the world, right? As, you know, intensely emotional and unstable. But sometimes that's exactly appropriate. Why not believe that that is a beneficial expression? Why do we have to? Why have we been trained by our society to keep our emotions under control, right? So that we can keep doing our job, keep being productive in the world. Hey, Sister Judith. So yeah. So it has been full moon. So emotions will be high generally, and that's okay. That's okay. I think, you know, I worked yesterday in the full moon transmission around sort of basically loving yourself through this process, you know, of developing a more accepting relationship of who you be, so that, you know, awareness and then acceptance can flow into appreciation, right? We can cease to judge ourselves so harshly against these expectations, these shoulds that society has programmed us with and keeps displaying to us through various media around the way that we quote unquote should be, what's an appropriate way to be, what's a successful way of being in the world. We can stop judging ourselves against that and start accepting who we be, and therefore appreciating who we be. And from that, we will start loving who we be. And once we start loving who we are, then we start seeing the world through the perspective of love, and everything gets better. Even though it's the same world, it's just everything gets better because our perspective is basically everything. Our experience of the world is coming through our perspective. The actions we take are shaped by the perspective that we are viewing the current conditions through, right? If we choose to step forward in confidence to do something that feels not productive, what's that other word that we like that starts with a P? Purposeful. It feels purposeful. I hate it when I keep losing words. You know, we step forward into doing something purposeful. It's generally because we feel that the conditions are reasonably favourable. Whether the conditions are is individual, and it's basically shaped by the perspective that which we are viewing the world. So our intent to maintain a mindset that views the world as beneficial, as supportive, actually helps us to start being more purposeful in the world, right? And I know it's a hard line. Are we just faking it till we make it? Are we hiding our head in the sand and not willing to look at the truth of what's going on, right? What is this truth of what's going on? Everyone's truth is individual to their own perspective. Hey, Sister Anne. Hey, Sister Sam. Anne and Sam, both joining us from the UK. Good evening. So it's rather interesting, right? As humans, we get very caught up in this sort of absoluteness that the world is this sort of way, and we need to know the truth. And until we know the truth, then, you know, we can't really do the right thing. But really, what is the right thing other than expanding yourself into a joyous expression of yourself and engaging with the world in a way that feels purposeful to your soul alone? That's all that matters, right? That's what you're here for. I know that might sound selfish to you, and you're somehow been programmed into this idea that you should be here working for humanity. You are. But hey, Sister Jane, but you don't do it by sacrificing yourself. And Sister Jill, welcome. I know I'm saying a lot of welcomes this morning. So I guess where we're going with this is recognize that it's your perspective of the world that is really shaping your experience of it, and thus your interaction with it. At this time, I believe there's a really awesome opportunity to dive deeper into the intrinsic love that's available to us, to help us expand out of this very judgmental state of being that many of us have found ourselves in. Many of us have a lower sense of self-worth based on the way that we've been trained to think that we should be, and we are very cognizant, right? We're always aware or measuring ourselves against this expectation and then coming up short and then trying harder to do better. And it's keeping us in a state of stress, which cuts us off, ironically, from our intuitive guidance and from the love that we are. So we no longer feel self-appreciation. We no longer feel self-love because we're not good enough for that. We're too busy trying to prove ourselves to these expectations and the people that we perceive uphold these expectations, whether those be societal leaders or whether those be our parents or our spouse or our children or our boss or our whatever it might be, right? We're too busy trying to appear to be a good person rather than just allowing ourselves to accept the goodness that we are. And that is what railroads so many of us from basically living a very purposeful life and a very enjoyable life. And the two can be very much intertwined, right? Anyway, I suppose I better answer Jen's question. I am very open to any other questions coming to the fore. So if you didn't catch that recording from yesterday, the full moon thing, it is just a little bit further down this feed. It will be just the notification, and on the notification you can just click on the event link, which will take you to what is now the replay, right? I don't get into posting replay links all the time because it's basically the same link, right? Nothing changes. It might be just your internet, Jill. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way it is, and it always seems to be better in replay, unfortunately, which makes it a bummer because I like to interact with people and yet they're having trouble with their video. It's the same sometimes with the light language transmissions I do, etc., via instant teleseminar. Sometimes the web player on the listener's side is not so clear, and yet the replay is fine. So it's not coming from my side, it's generally coming from the delivery side of these platforms, which is a bit of a bummer. But anyway, what to do? So say in Hindi, kya karo, what to do? Kya karo. Which is usually sort of accompanied by a shrug. What to do? Life is, c'est la vie. Life is what it is. Annoying and frustrating generally if, we allow ourselves to identify with the problems as being a big problem. The challenges as being a problem is a better way of saying that. Anyway, let's read what Jen wrote. And as I said, I'm very happy for other people to chime in and add to anything that you might like us to talk on, clarify, or answer. Anyway, Jen said, this is a great expression. I love this because it's so that we could dig quite deep into this. Jen said, lately I have been surrounding myself with those who are emotionally more mature than me. Some embarrassment and shame around feeling immature. This idea I should already be there rather than just honoring and appreciating exactly where I am. How can I come to deeper love, appreciation, and acceptance of where I am, exactly where I am right now, and drop the constant background comparison of how I'm worse than or better than other people? Hey, Sister Betty. Yeah, so this is really, really common, as I was just talking about, especially those of us who have a, heightened sense of self-awareness and a more spiritual bent. Many of us have been persecuted over many lifetimes, so we already come in feeling like we don't fit in, right? We have this sense that the world is not so safe. And so we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to fit in and to be good enough, because that feels safe to us, right? So we've been trained from very young as empaths as well. We feel into what other people are feeling around us. We're always measuring other people. We've got a very keen eye. I know I love people watching because, I don't know, I'm just drawn to understanding, wanting to understand as if I can. Like, I've come to the understanding that I can't understand other people. I have enough trouble understanding myself. But the point is, I like to observe other people and just wonder what they're thinking, what's going on for them, and feeling into their state of being and all of the rest of it. And I recognize that desire basically comes from a self-preservation tendency, right? Where me being aware of what's going on with other people has helped me to stay a step ahead of the curve, right? To make sure that I'm pleasing them, or at least not displeasing them, which is important to my safety, having experienced many times where people have been displeased with me as, in my state of being, and thus, persecuted, punished me. So the point is, recognize that we are, and I'll use the word, your own word back to you, as a more mature soul here on this planet, whether you believe you have emotional maturity or not, which I want to dig into a little deeper, but as a more mature soul here on this planet, which doesn't mean you're good or anything, just means you've been here longer than most, right? That's what maturity is. It's a greater degree of experience. That's what maturity is. It's when a wine matures, it's because it's older. Not all wines mature well, mind you, right? If they haven't been prepared well, then they can mature quite badly. So the conditions that bring us up indicate whether we mature well or not, right? But maturity is maturity. It's basically just age. So this thing called emotional maturity, I think, is a bit of a misnomer sometimes. What you're alluding to with the state that the people who are more emotionally mature around you are basically people who have practiced emotional control techniques, or emotional coping techniques, or emotional mastery techniques more than you, so that they are more skilled at managing their emotions. They're more skilled at identifying their emotions, and they're more skilled at using various coping mechanisms to stay, I'll say, in control of their emotional state of being, right? Because that is regarded as emotional maturity. It is looked upon as a very good thing by our society, because emotionally mature people generally are very productive, and they can show up and keep working despite the fact that they might have been experiencing situations that put other people into emotional discordance, emotional pain, and therefore emotional non-functionality. People don't function so well when their emotions are running high. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being capable of managing your emotions well. But many people who are labelled emotionally mature are actually emotionally closed. Now, I know many of the people you are hanging around, Jen, are not so emotionally closed. They have practiced techniques that allow them to be very aware of their emotions. They have practiced techniques that allow them to embrace their emotions and process them in a more functional way, right? In a more functional way that creates less discordance and more evolution, if you like, or flow through. That's good. That's good. It's great. I think it's great to surround yourself with people who are better than you. In anything, if you want to be a good guitarist, surround yourself with people who play the guitar better than you. That will always inspire you to improve. It will always, through observation, you will learn from these people in whatever skill you want to improve. And if you want to improve your ability to manage your emotions, then surrounding yourself with people who manage their emotions well is great. The issue is, for people like us who are already hard on ourselves, is that we tend to judge ourselves and feel less than when we notice that other people are coping, quote unquote, from our point of view, better with their emotions than you. Now, understand that this doesn't make them necessarily more spiritually mature, nor does it make them more aligned with their truth, right? It doesn't necessarily equate. It could be that people who are very aligned with their truth and quite spiritually mature have come to a what you might call a skill level with managing their emotions. That could be the truth, but not necessarily. So it's always beneficial to inquire a little bit deeper whether you're putting people on too high a pedestal from where they really deserve to be. And do people need to be on pedestals at all? Although it's very common for our intellect to want to do that. We love, our intellect runs in the masculine energy, right? And it's been influenced by the shadow masculine over the last few thousand years, right? So our intellect is very keen on hierarchies, on pyramid structures, etc. So that's just as it is. And we just have to, be cognizant of that, recognize that, and then relax out of it as best we can, right? Notice that is our tendency to want to hierarch things around us and thinking that helps us to stay safe, really, to recognize who's in charge, who's the best, and then, please them the most, right? And the people who are down and the people who are getting downtrodden, we should use them, right, to step up. This is how society has worked, right? You keep treading on the downtrodden and aspiring to the leaders, and that's how you increase your spot on the ladder. Many of us don't feel to do that, yet we've still been influenced by that mentality somewhat, and it's not easy to break because it's very ingrained in society. Anywho, so how do we come to the point where we can love, appreciate, and accept exactly where we are? I think it's just, basically it comes down to consistent, conscious intent to keep taking a deep breath and relaxing out of the stress state that starts to evolve when we start comparing and judging ourselves against others, and just remind ourselves that we have traits that are beneficial too. It doesn't matter who we compare ourselves against. We can always find something that they are better at and something that we are better at, generally, right? I challenge you to look at anybody out there and understand that potentially you are better at doing something than they are. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. The point is, we tend to hierarch ourselves through the perspective of what traits are important. And that is a moment by moment thing, So when you're intent on working with, emotional stability and emotional, I don't like the word emotional maturity, but, emotional functionality, right? Then you tend to hierarch people who are better at it than you. If you're very intent on working on the guitar, then you wouldn't be so much worried about the emotions. You'd be more worried about their guitar playing technique, etc. Right? So be aware that is a natural tendency, and then choose not to allow it to overly influence you. It's going to influence you to some degree. You have to accept that and appreciate that is part of your history, and then choose to expand out of it. Do your practices to come back to recognizing the being that you be, right? Come into your heart and allow that love to flourish, and recognize that the love that's flourishing in your heart is exactly as beneficial, equal, powerful, potent, good as the love that's coming from these other people that you are judging yourself against heart. Whether you're judging them as better than you or judging them as worse than you, the love in their heart, while it's not exactly the same as yours, is exactly as potent, loving, divine as yours, right? It's just influenced with slightly different flavors based on past experiences stretching back through the eons. So the more that we can, come back to recognizing who we are, and this is a consistent practice that some of us have to religiously follow, right? We have to set protocols in place, that we do our morning meditation, that we journal afterwards, we do a gratitude practice, etc., etc. Whatever it is for us, we have to come back to that program, right? To program ourselves in a more positive light, right? To help lift us out of the negative program that we've received from society over many lifetimes, that we're not good enough, that we have to try harder, that other people are better than us, and we should ascribe to being as good as them, right? That our leaders, you know, and these you know, mythical beings in society, you know, who have made it, can show us how to as well, and we just need to emulate them. We don't need to emulate them as well. We can take inspiration from all sorts of people that we witness in the world, but ultimately we're here to bring our unique divine essence to the fore and to expansively and creatively express ourselves here on the planet as the divine being that we be. Whether that be with a degree of emotional mastery or not, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You know, no one's here to judge you based on how well you can emotionally deal with the world. Ultimately, that's not the highest ideal. However, having a degree of mastery with how you work with your emotions can be very beneficial in being purposeful and actually being happy here on the planet. A lot of the time, our emotions, you know, take us into states of being that are quote unquote close to suffering, if not suffering. So there are pros and cons. The important thing is not to try too hard to be something that is not really who you be, right? Not to try and externally, unauthentically emulate emotional maturity until it really comes out from your heart, right? Because as you grow, you know, intrinsically, I believe that we all gain a level of mastery over our emotions, because what basically happens is we expand into an awareness of how great we be, bigger than we be, so that our emotions become relatively a smaller component of what is influencing us in any particular moment. When we are lost in the delusion of being a biological human only, then our emotions tend to push us around quite a lot. Or people have stuffed their emotions completely and deny them. It can go one way or the other. It can be quite a polarized event. And some people swing from one event to the other. Then most of the time they're emotionally quite repressed until it bursts out, and then they're emotionally quite active. And we call that emotional immaturity, ironically. Well, not ironically, but, you know. So this is because most people are scared of their emotions because their emotions seem so big. The way to overcome that is not to try and make your emotions smaller. It's to make yourself, your identification bigger. So you identify with more of yourself, right? The bigger aspect of you, your divine self, your higher connection. Doesn't mean you deny your humanity, doesn't mean you deny your biology, but you just identify with being more than that. So that the emotionality or the mentality or the physicality is less influential on the totality of who you be, and thus you can operate in this world more effectively. Yeah, exactly. It's inferior and exterior is only or superior. Sorry, inferior or superior is only opinions, right? Based on individuality of what you're measuring against, what metrics you are using, and how you are perceiving those metrics, right? Nothing is absolute. I just want to go back to, and I see you were basically speaking to Sam's question. How big is this question? Yeah, I can read it here. Sam said, what about when we surround ourselves with people who consider themselves superior to us and enjoy reminding us that we are inferior? Is this self-sabotage? That's certainly a pattern I recognize in my past, which I am growing out of now. Yeah, it is a form of self-sabotage, Sam, but it's also a form of finding comfort in what you believe to be true, right? It's basically reinforcing the mode of operation that your ego has chosen to operate under. So if you've chosen to believe that you're inferior, and that's how you're going to do the world. So you're always going to be on the defense. You're always going to be protective. You're always going to be trying to please people. Then you tend to attract situations that reinforce that back to you, right? And so you might see it as self-sabotage, but basically it's self-reinforcement, right? Of a predominating belief system inside of yourself. As you start to change that belief system, then you see that that behavior was sabotaging you because it was keeping you in a belief system that was ironically comfortable despite its discordance, right? Because it's, you know, our ego would much rather be right than happy. So if we can be right in believing that other people keep abusing us, or other people are superior to us and we are inferior, then we'll place ourselves in situations that keep proving that belief system, because then we get to feel that we're right. Oh yeah, look, I'm right, I'm inferior, I'm not good enough. You know, this person's just reinforced I'm not good enough. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So there's an element of us, of our ego, that feels good about that, because then we can believe that we can predict the world. We're going to know that this is going to keep happening, and that makes us feel safe. Stupidly, but we recognize this behavior. It's very well documented in science now that we'd much rather be right than happy. So, so, you know, as we grow spiritually out of that low self-worth, we start to see the behavior for what it is, and then we get the choice to make the opportunity to make choice and to change who we're hanging out with. At that point, right, it's a bit of a battle, our old habits against our new intentions. And while I encourage you not to fight, it's important to recognize that this is a power tussle between old habits and new intentions. And your job is to keep, you know, leaning into your new intentions and taking the hard steps to break old habits, and of surrounding yourself with people who like to put you down, you know, out of habit, right? And as you do that, then things will improve for you. It's you know, relatively simple. Okay. Sam said, I enjoy experiencing my emotions, part of the joy being in human body. Yeah, and I think that's important, that we recognize that this emotional maturity is not the disconnection from our emotions, but rather the recognition that these are just our emotions, right? And that it doesn't become all of us. Although we can allow our emotions to take us into very deep states of being, which can be very, very beneficial to us, right? Emotions are a powerful, powerful tool when used expansively. And so that we are empowered to enjoy our emotions rather than have our emotions basically running us most of the time. Of course, it's not, you know, no one's absolutely, you know, mastered their emotions, and no one is 100% ruled by their emotions. Everyone is somewhere on the spectrum of working with their emotions in some way or another. So, Jill wrote, can often be traced back to what our parents' teachers tell us repeatedly before we are 6 or 7. Yeah, and to be honest, in my opinion, Jill, it's traced back to past lifetimes where we were pre-programmed with this and chose our parents respectively. So it's important not to just blame your parents or your teachers, right? It's very easy to fall into this habit of wanting someone to blame, you know. So we look at our parents and go, well, you know, my mum continually told me I was not good enough, or whatever it might be, right? And then use that as a blame point. Ultimately, you know, no one's to blame. All sorts of things have happened. What is important is it's your responsibility and no one else's responsibility to grow out of whatever condition you find yourself in right now, ultimately. So we can look at whether our parents did this or our teachers did that, but ultimately all of that is a reflection of the energy that we were holding from other times. And so this has been going on for many, many cycles. And it's important now that we get out of the blame game and into really taking responsibility for how we can expand out of these contracted states of being, right? Betty wrote, I'm currently surrounded by friends who call me for meditation. I always get those words mixed up. It's only a little T in the difference. Call me for mediation because they're not able to communicate without reacting in anger and making the other wrong. Yep. So, yeah, which, you know, this is unfortunately, this experience, not the experience of your friends always calling you to mediate, But this experience of people being so polarized at the moment and having such an anger response is exactly what has been planned by the dark agenda in terms of keeping our society divided right now so they can rule for a little bit longer. They're using all sorts of different tactics and situations to create this idea of us versus them. Ideally, breaking it down, from this team and that team, and then each team gets broken down, trying to create the smallest divisions that they can. So family units are getting split apart, relationships are getting split apart. Everyone is finding themselves feeling very isolated, very small, very alone, and very scared, right? Because they're losing the connections that they have with others, their community that help them feel strong. And so scared people are easy to control, right? And angry people, reacting in anger, they're scared of their anger. See, people are reacting in anger and they don't like it. They're not using their anger in a sort of a sacred, powerful way to basically recognize what is abusing them right now and to rise up and to do something about it. They're feeling angry and then feeling guilty and then making the anger wrong and then making the person who made them feel angry wrong for making them feel angry, right? And this snowball down into this tighter and tighter contraction of low self-worth and loathing and hopelessness is spiraling at the moment. And while it can be quite alarming to witness, my personal opinion is that this is going to lead to a breakthrough, right? A breakdown to breakthrough, where people are going to find themselves in such levels of discordance that they actually snap out of it, right? Because it just becomes so intense that breakthroughs occur. Some people, of course, will break down, no doubt about it. Appreciate yourself, Betty, that you can play this role of mediation and choose to not get caught up in the game of right versus wrong, and really help people. And I know this is you in your heart. Help people to find the joy and to understand and accept what is basically happening and what is basically driving their division and their anger, right? And their judgments. So that rather than mediating for why things happened and who did what and why we should accept that they've done it, really help people to dig deeper into the deeper things that are going on. And this is actually a healing opportunity. These divisions coming up and these judgments coming up, because people tend to judge others as wrong based on how they judge themselves as wrong. We tend to find that our external relationships, how we're relating to other people, is a reflection of how we're relating to ourselves. When we're criticizing others, it's generally because we criticize ourselves. When we're feeling sympathetic and worried about other people, it's generally because we're feeling sympathetic and worried about ourselves. These reflections are very, deep. And as we start to recognize that, we can take our emphasis off what's going on around us and bring our emphasis back onto what is going on within us and to do the work there, because that is ultimately where we have the most ability to make good progress, right? Because it's hard to fix the external world right now, or ever. It's hard to fix the conditions so that we can then be happy. It's much easier to fix the internal conditions, which is basically just acceptance and self-love, right? To progress through the process of releasing, I'm just cognizant of the time, progress through the process of releasing these fragments of energy that we're carrying over from the past that are now coming up quite strongly, right, as a purification. This energy that we're currently going through is basically just a big purification. Purifications aren't pleasant, right, because we're experiencing all that's discordant right now, externally and internally. The more that we can remember that, the less that we make it wrong, that we experience such discordance, such hopelessness, such emotional intensity right now, right? Because that emotional intensity is part of what we are releasing, and we don't need to make ourselves wrong that it's hard to show up emotionally mature right now. And that doesn't mean that we can't learn some techniques that help us work with our emotions in a much more empowered way, because we can. We can learn techniques, awareness techniques, breathing techniques to help calm us down, different coping mechanisms for working with our emotions in a deep way that helps us meet the needs of our inner aspects of self that might be crying out with these emotions, our inner child, our inner teenager, our inner rebel, our inner wounded healer, right? Whatever it might be that's expressing through us with emotion, right? We can work with these aspects if we have the awareness. And that's all it is, really. Awareness, acceptance, appreciation, and love, right? We basically progress through that process. And awareness comes first. And unfortunately, the awareness on its own it can be quite painful because becoming aware of what's going on without accepting it is a very uncomfortable place to be. Sam wrote, I always feel like a disappointment to my dad as a child. I always felt like a disappointment to my child as a dad. To my dad as a child. God, I'll try and read correctly. Starting a pattern where I was never enough for people in my life. Yeah, I feel like my dad gave me a gift. He presented a huge opportunity for me to recognize I am enough with or without his validation. Yeah, and if you basically dig deeper into your dad, right, you'll recognize generally his expression was coming from love, trying to improve you because he probably didn't feel good enough himself, right? This is what we see. People who are very critical of others, especially the people they love, right? They can be critical of their children basically because they're critical of themselves and they want their children to be better. They want their children to be devoid of any faults so that they don't feel as not good enough as they do, right? So we recognize this, that many people are critical, harsh on others, basically from a twisted love that they want the other to improve. They want their children to improve so that they're not afflicted with the same not good enough that they're carrying and potentially suppressing and hiding from the world. So, you know, with compassion, we understand why people are the way they are. They're not generally not victimizing us out of any malevolence. They're just coping with their own pain. Betty said, I am in quarantine for a week because I caught COVID, but not much more than a cold now, and I feel even more detached from emotional dramas of friends and colleagues. Yeah, I think a lot of people are experiencing the benefit of some time to process. And you know, I think this whole COVID thing now, especially with this latest variant, is just an opportunity to release a lot of crap. You know, it is basically for the vast majority of people who are going through it, from what I've talked to, and I've got a lot of friends in Australia who are going through it. And you know, it is. Some are saying it's a little bit worse than a cold. Some are saying it's hardly a cold. I think it's affecting each and everyone a little bit differently, different symptomology. Some people really get it in their throat. Some people have some quite significant fatigue for a few days, etc. Different things are going on, different responses biologically. But ultimately, people get to spend some time in quarantine alone and being sick. And finally, society has given them permission to rest while they are sick, rather than to pop a couple of Codral, couple of cold and flu tablets and soldier on, like we always used to do, right? Soldier on with Codral, right? If you get a cold, you're supposed to, you know, still be productive, still keep going to work. Your body's telling you it's time to rest and release a whole heap of mucus, a whole heap of phlegm, a whole heap of discordance from your body, physically, biologically, but also mentally, emotionally, and energetically, right? This is what the cold is, really. It's a healing crisis. It's an opportunity to rest. But society trained us for many decades to not rest during a cold, that we're supposed to carry on, that we only get 5-6 sick days a year. And so, you know, you can't afford to just waste it on a simple cold. To have some tablets, you know, stiff upper lip, carry on, get out there in the world. Suddenly with COVID, all of a sudden things have changed. And if you get sick now, you're supposed to isolate, supposed to stay at home. And ultimately that's a good thing. It's a really good progression now, because people actually can have the rest that their bodies really need through this thing, through the concept or the perception of this thing anyway. It is really just the perception, how high we've elevated the status of this COVID thing. We've had COVID viruses for a long time on this planet. Nothing's really changed with this new one breaking out, other than maybe there was a little bit of gain of function trickery going on, at least at first, before it mutated and diluted itself. Anyway, I'm not getting drawn into that that debate yet again, because it's a little bit upsetting with, you know, how people are being railroaded these days. Jill said, I just had it. Oh, sorry, there's no just there. I had an encounter just like you described at my solicitor's, where the receptionist was a little thug and was demanding I share what medical reasons I had for not being able to wear a face covering. When I declined to tell her, she said that I should label myself with a badge or a lanyard, and I said that would be like 1930s Germany. Couldn't help myself. She started shouting at me that I was being abusive. Yeah, I walked away. Yeah, Jill, so awesome. Just, you know, the point is not to allow ourselves to get caught into these things, and just to walk our truth and be our truth, and just hold strong with it. Brother Doug, what are you talking about? You're talking about the soil breaking down nicely and getting rich all the time. Heal the earth for heart connection. Permaculture by design as... Yeah, perfect, Doug. So basically, as we work with the soil and nature, we're healing ourselves, right? As we heal our soils, which have been degraded and abused, then we're working with ourselves, as within, so without. And so there's so many different pathways we can take to our own healing. And some of us choose building, some of us choose art, some of us choose gardening. All are good, but you know, my yoga master used to say, all cultures are good cultures, but the best culture is agriculture. There's something very satisfying and very necessary about growing food. And so that starts with good soil. And you know, and this is an analogous of growing good humans, right? It all starts with our soil. It all starts with our foundations. It all starts with the microbiome. And so both on a biological level and on an emotional and on a spiritual, energetic level, it's about managing our foundations. It's about managing the conditions rather than trying to orchestrate the growth, right? There's no point trying to, you know, train a fruit tree to bear fruit if we're not looking after the soil, right? Because if we look after the soil, everything else generally looks after itself. That's the same with us. If we put ourselves in conditions that are conducive to our own blossoming, our own flourishing, then we will bear fruit naturally, right? We don't need to micromanage that process so much as, you know, when we look after the basics, right? Give ourselves the nutrients, give ourselves the water, allow ourselves exposure to the sun, etc. Both, you know, both literally and whatever that is when it's an analogy, analogically. Try and say that when you're drunk. Anyway, Betty said, yes, a required retreat, helping me to accept, observe emotionally intense energies flying around. Exactly, and there's a lot of it happening. This is a big purification event, and it is an awesome opportunity, especially with this moon, to spend time in introspection and acceptance of what you are seeing. That's the hard thing, right? It's all very well to see it in its intensity, but it's another thing again to take that deep breath and relax into acceptance that what we are feeling is what we are releasing, and this emotional intensity is not a wrongness. It's not a failing on our part. We're not supposed to be in control all of the time of all of our stuff. Allowing it to fly out of control from time to time is part of the process of expansion, right? We have to allow ourselves to have these experiences. Anywho's. No doubt I've gone well over time yet again, my friends. There it is, 9:45. So I will end it there. Much love to you all. If you have any further questions, concerns, if you want to reach out and ask for some more individual help or something, then please feel free to do so. We are here to serve. It's my greatest joy to help people. And so don't be shy. We can work something out. Much, much love. Bye for now. Bye-bye. Oh, missed the finish button.